This is a book. This is a cover. Joe Klein wrote a fantastic review about it, and I think people should know if they haven't read it yet that you widen the lens, and it's full of scoops, and you've been asked about a lot of them. We have some exclusive sound from your interview with Trump, but I first want to ask you about the process of not just covering him every day, but then diving in and writing this and looking at him even more closely and more intensely for a long period of time. What was that like?
It was intense, Nicole. And this was a portrait that I wanted to paint, a larger portrait, a character study of Donald Trump and of the milieu he came from, of the world that created him, the forces in his family that created him, the unique aspects of his character that led to where we got here, how he took advantage of various moments in history in New York City and then nationally, and then exported, New York rules, and what Ted Cruz once described as New York values is really actually what Trump did, but not in a socially liberal way, did export to Washington and then the Republican Party. And that is what we see now and everything you just described in our political system.
He talks about one of the Republicans in the news, and you shared with us some exclusive sound about Herschel Walker. And it's as good of a story as any to jump into the damage he has wrought on our politics. Let me play that sound, and thank you for sharing this with us. This is from an interview you did before this week's scandal threatened, I don't know if anything threatens anyone anymore, but before this broke. Let me play this.
In Georgia, think about Georgia. In Georgia, Herschel, they did the ballad to Herschel Walker. They did ballads. Do you know how great a football player is? Do you know that he was in University of Georgia? He was the best football player in the nation, by far. He's the best football player in the history of Georgia. And for the most part in the history of the guy, as a running back, he's a top 3 or 4 running back.
But he has a complicated personal history, which is what they're worried about.
But do you know that it's a personal history that 10 years ago maybe would have been a problem, 20 years ago would have been a bigger problem? I don't think it's a problem today.
Why is that? Why do you think that that's changed?
The world is changing.
He changed the world. I mean, I think that even Roy Moore might survive in this climate. Does he see it that way?
He wouldn't say it. I was trying to get him to acknowledge some of that. He didn't want to go there, but he absolutely knows it. Now, he thinks that because he survived any number of scandals in 2016, he has shown politicians they don't have to. And he did acknowledge, this is a changing landscape. His point about 10 years ago, 20 years ago, some of it does predate him. And it really actually goes back to the Tea Party era to some extent, the beginning of it. But he has created a new bar and a relativism that has just seeped into the fabric of political and public life.
Is it a bar, or is it the elimination of any bar?
It's the lowering of a bar, and it's the erosion of a bar. Now, in the case of Herschel Walker, we're going to find out whether there is still a bar, because what we're talking about with Herschel Walker is very different than the Access Hollywood tape, which was ultimately a tape, and it was not proof of an action or an allegation of a specific physical act, although certainly Trump was talking about it and boasting about it. But we're going to find out if the rules changed as broadly as Trump is trying to suggest they did, or if Trump managed to survive things that other people couldn't.
Well, and I think the lasting stain of Access Hollywood tape on the Republican Party was glorifying sexual assault. I mean, what he was describing, he was describing in a very enthusiastic manner, and that the Republican Party, by greenlighting that, began its journey down this path. Does he want the Herschel Walkers to win to prove this point? Does he want more damaged Republicans in the party?
He wants to show that nothing matters. And one of his goals, and I write about this, is he believes that everyone is just like him. Everything is a transaction. Everything can be exchanged. Everything can be reduced to a deal. There are no red lines. And so to show that there are no red lines always makes him happy.
The first page of the prologue opens up with an extraordinarily illuminating anecdote about covering him on questions of race. And I want to ask you, do you think he's a racist?
I think he says and does racist things over a very long period of time. I don't know how else you would define it. I think that somebody who has been incorporating racial paranoia into his public persona since the 1980s, who took out an ad related to the Central Park 5 case, where there were teenagers who were charged in that case, and they were all teenagers of color, And he called for bringing back the death penalty, and he still won't apologize, even though for doing that, and insists he was right, even though there is proof now that their confessions were coerced by officials. So you go from there through the White House. He repeatedly says racist things and then says he was taken out of context. But at a certain point, I'm not sure how much benefit of the doubt people are supposed to give him.
Well, in your anecdote, and maybe just tell us the story. I mean, when he's caught, when his racism is revealed, all he wants to know is, in the case of the story you tell, what does he need to say to get out of that news cycle?
So this was a moment in the campaign. It was May 5th of 2016, and it was actually the day of the Indiana primary. Now, this was not the first time that David Duke, the notorious anti-Semite, had been celebrating Donald Trump, and he had previously been very slow to disavow David Duke. And I write about how, one of his advisors had urged him to do so earlier, and he said, we don't have to do it right away. A lot of those people vote. On this instance, David Duke was condemning the quote-unquote Jewish extremists who he said were after Trump, and I had emailed the campaign looking for a comment. And Trump called me back, and I expected I would hear from an aide. And he said he was there with his 2 Jewish lawyers, and he read a statement which was, anti-Semitism has no place in our society, which should be united, not divided. And that was all he said. And there was a pause, and I said, that's it? And he said, what do you need me to say? And that, to me, is just the defining ethos, or one of the defining ethoses of his approach to life. He says what he has to say to get through 10 minutes of time.
And do you have any sense of what he believes?
He has these id-like impulses on issues like trade, which he's been very consistent on. He's been talking about other countries ripping the U.S. off for decades. He has antipathy for global alliances and the post-World War II order, and that's been consistent, but they're loose and they're diffuse in how he describes it. They're not really based in history. And he is willing to sublimate those impulses if there's something else he can gain.
What do you take us through sort of the body of reporting of the effort to turn him into something different than what you just described?
So throughout the campaign, there was this effort to turn him into something that could pass for a conventional nominee, and we all saw it in real time. We would be assured repeatedly that he was going to start being more presidential. He was going to give,
You'd say it. I'm going to be so presidential.
I can be so presidential. He would look at literally a quote from him. He would look at the teleprompter and he would read, and he would sound as if he was reading the speech for the first time, and these words were totally unfamiliar to him. And then he would tweet, and then he would undo it. And he even had a moment where, even when he said, I'll be so presidential, at another moment he said, in a moment of candor, I'm not changing. And that was him. He was never going to change. But Republicans, those who didn't like him and those who did, made sort of this uncomfortable peace to try to get him over the finish line. And then he proceeded on the very first day to start fighting about his crowd size. And that set the tone for the 4 years.
I keep thinking about that first day where he goes to the CIA, and he's so ignorant / disdainful of their mission that he's standing there at the CIA in front of the wall of the unnamed people who died serving their mission, bragging about fighting about his crowd size. And if you connect that dot to what's going on right now, and I've talked to Sue Gordon on this program, it's abundantly clear he never appreciated, either in terms of what was on the page or what went into putting any information on a page, the PDB. What, other than the letters to and from Kim Jong-un, which, you write about how much he loves those and loved them, and I've listened to the audio of him telling you how neat they are and lying, it appears, about where they are. What do you think he stole along with those letters?
It could be anything under the sun, Nicole, and it's been described.
But what did he like? I mean,
was he interested in?
Yeah.
He was interested in photographs. He was interested in information about other leaders. One of the most interesting pieces there is that he had some kind of information about Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and that could be anything under the sun. One former government official made the point to me that U.S. presidents are given a classified briefing and a declassified briefing when they are having foreign leader meetings, and they were speculating about which one of those this could be. Trump is obsessed with other people's secrets. He is obsessed with information about other people, and he is obsessed with looking as if he has something that you don't know. So I think this was going to be anything like that. Sue Gordon actually made a comment to us about these documents that was dead on about how he views everything, which is that he sees everything in terms of leverage. And what that means, again, in any given moment can change, but I do believe that's a big part of what this was.
What was it like to see these people that you had covered go in and try to play the part of White House staffers, knowing, as you knew them, that Jared Kushner really didn't have any sort of traditional experience or chops to have the job he had, let alone couldn't vet out of the clearance process, that Ivanka went in there and made a mockery, brought nepotism right into the center of the West Wing of the White House. I mean, what was it like? And they largely failed in the jobs they said they were going to do, but they also created a ton of strife with people like John Kelly and others that were there to try to, I guess, normalize is the best word, Donald Trump.
The strife is what came through in every interview, literally every interview that I did. The number of people who just complained that the presence of Trump's relatives in the White House, whatever, policy pieces Jared Kushner accomplished, and he got some things done, they just weren't generally things the president cared about because Kushner had his own political views.
Like what about?
Abraham Accords, criminal justice reform, which Trump continues to complain about. I actually asked him about it. It's in some handwritten notes in the middle of the book, and he said something to the effect of, did it for African Americans, got zero credit, and that's really how he saw it. But there was just a pervasive sense for people working in the White House that it was problematic. There are nepotism laws for a reason, and that it's just always complicated, even without concerns about having two family members who are wealthy and who didn't divest from businesses. It's just complicated. It creates complications for staff, and Trump has a real reluctance to confront his own family, at least in those scenarios he did. And so he charged John Kelly, the White House chief of staff, with fixing things, and then Trump proceeded to undermine it and then look at Kelly as a way to get rid of his relatives, but then wouldn't acknowledge that. It was a mess.